In the last video lecture on the introduction to behavioral ecology, we discussed that a number of behaviors have both a genetic and a learned component. This video lecture is going to focus on those behaviors that have a strong genetic component. These are sometimes called directed movements. So the first example of a behavior that has a strong genetic component is the photo that you see before you of the monarch butterfly migration. The migration happens from Canada all the way to Mexico, and it encompasses a number of generations of monarch butterflies. And that's one of the reasons that we're pretty sure this migration is controlled by a genetic influence. No one individual makes the entire trip. In recent studies, they've discovered that monarch butterflies appear to be able to sense the position of the sun. They also appear to be able to sense the direction of Earth's magnetic poles. And so those two abilities together give the monarch butterfly basically a compass. And we believe that their internal compass, instead of being directly pointed north all the time, depending on the seasons, will be either pointed to head north or south, so that they're in the appropriate place at the right time. So two other directed movements that are important are kinesis and taxis. And they're similar, but they're also different. So what is kinesis? Kinesis is when there's a difference in the level of activity under one condition compared to another. So the classic example of this is the pill bug or roly-poly. In a dry area, it becomes more active. This increases the probability that it will eventually find a humid area, which is the type of conditions that it prefers to live in. So it's not as though the pill bug has a way of sensing where the humidity is. It's more that it increases activity in dry areas so that it will eventually find a humid area. Taxis, on the other hand, is a fairly automatic movement towards a certain type of stimulus. And so one of the organisms that undergoes taxis, well, many different species of bacteria, and if there's a high concentration of a certain chemical in the area around them, they can be receptive to that, and they can slowly direct their movement towards whatever that chemical is. So an example of this could be chemotaxis towards sugar or calcium. So the receptors would tell them when they're getting closer to a more and more concentrated solution of that substance. Another example of taxis is something called the rheotaxis, and this is when fish orientate themselves in an upstream direction, and the purpose of this would be to keep the fish from being carried away by the river, while at the same time positioning their mouths in the direction of where food would typically come from. So kinesis is a change in activity level, and taxis is a directed movement towards some stimulus. Both of them are under heavy genetic control. As you saw at the beginning with the migration of the monarch butterflies, there's also a lot of evidence that suggests that bird migrations are under heavy genetic influence. One example that the text talks about is the case of the blackcaps. Some blackcaps are migratory, some blackcaps are stationary, and when we put a migratory blackcap in a cage, it will undergo what we call migratory restlessness. Basically, it will flap around in the cage and try and move as though it were needing to go on migration. If you take the blackcaps that have shown migratory restlessness and they are from a migratory breeding stock, and we breed them with the stationary blackcaps, what we find in the next generation, regardless of the environmental conditions, is that about half of them will exhibit this migratory restlessness. They'll be flapping around in the cage. So what this shows is that migrations are also under heavy genetic influence. Signals are another animal behavior that's under the strong influence of genetics. A signal is any behavior that causes a change in another animal's behavior. Communication in animals is the transmission, reception of, and response to a signal. So below, in the top left-hand corner, you can see the cat clearly making a signal, stay away. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner an auditory type of communication between two birds. Perhaps they're engaged in some sort of mating ritual. Perhaps they're simply telling another one where there's food, or perhaps they're communicating about the presence of a predator. In the top right hand corner you can see an instance of chemical communication, which involves pheromones, and you see one ant nest being attacked by another species of ant. And so if you look really closely at the image, you may be able to see the large bodied ants being swarmed by the smaller ants. So they're only able to cause that type of reaction to an enemy invader by communicating with each other, and that communication is made through the signal of pheromones. Down in the bottom left hand corner you can see another example of communication between animals, and so this dog is making a signal that, hey, this is my territory. Another dog will come around, sniff that smell, and its behavior will change based on what it smells. So these are all examples of signals and communication in animals, different types of communication, but all of them are under a strong genetic influence. Now that we've come to the end of this video lecture, I want you to take some time and brainstorm 5 different ways that living things can communicate with each other. When you've made that list, I want you to find an article that talks about a behavior that scientists have recently discovered is controlled by genetics. Could be any animal or any living thing that you wish to choose. The only thing that I ask is that you look for it on something that's a peer-reviewed source. So could be a science magazine, could be a newspaper article,